scripts is forcing Tricare beneficiaries to use specific pharmacies on military bases. We heard from Dr. Miriam Atkins, an oncologist in Georgia, who discussed how PBMs, not doctors, can dictate which drugs a patient can use. They do this through tactics that require a patient to fail on a certain drug before trying another drug, and by requiring the use of mail-order pharmacies, which can be unreliable and wasteful. We also heard from Greg Baker, the CEO of Affirmed RX, a transparent PBM that works to provide clear pharmacy benefit services to employers. He discussed how typical PBM practices could be considered price gouging and gave examples of a cancer drug and the difference in price for a 30-day supply. The cancer drug was imatinib at Cost Plus Drugs versus CVS. That difference is astounding. A 30-day supply at Cost Plus Drugs costs $72. That very same 30-day supply at CVS costs more than $17,000. Those two prices are for the exact same prescription. It begs the question, why is one prescription so much more expensive? And what is happening with that extra money? We know that PBMs regularly engage in spread pricing, where PBMs overcharge payers and underpay pharmacies and pocket the extra money. We also know that drug manufacturers pay rebates to PBMs in order to be placed in a favorable tier on a formulary, which can make it difficult for competing prescriptions, often generics, to get on formularies. These practices have real-world consequences and impact constituents in all of our districts. I hope today's hearing provides more clarity into the pharmaceutical market so that Congress can determine what actions are necessary. I want to thank the witnesses, and I now yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Raskin for an opening statement.
Chairman Comer, thank you very much for calling the hearing and for your great leadership on this issue. Thanks to the witnesses for coming, and I want to thank the members on my side of the aisle who've arrived already, and Mr. Auchincloss from Massachusetts, who joins us today, who's an expert in the field. It's the second time we've come together to talk about this issue that affects everybody in America, access to affordable medication. And here's the bottom line value that we're seeking. In the wealthiest nation on earth, at the wealthiest time in our history, everybody should be able to afford the medical care and attention and prescription drugs that they need. In 2021, we spent $4.3 trillion on health care in our country, nearly twice as much per capita as the next closest country. Most of our healthcare system is for-profit, with many big corporations involved making billions of dollars in profits annually. During a multi-year investigation conducted by committee Democrats, we found that some major pharmaceuticals employed profit-maximizing pricing practices at the direct expense of the people who rely on their medications to survive. Today, we're investigating the role of pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, which are supposed to negotiate lower drug costs and improve the delivery of medication to patients. That's the theory. What we've actually heard is that certain PBM business practices may be favoring more expensive drugs and making it more difficult for patients to get timely and affordable access to the medication prescribed by their doctors at the pharmacy of their choice. In our last hearing, we heard from witnesses who suggested that PBMs and other big health companies are using their enormous market power to maximize their profits at the expense of patients and community pharmacies. As of today, 3 companies control 80% of the PBM market. The same parent companies that own these PBMs also own health insurers and pharmacies, so the parent company can profit at multiple points of access through the healthcare system. PBMs profit from rebates and fees from pharmaceuticals that want PBMs to include their drugs on insurance plans. PBMs also profit from health insurers directly, which reimburse PBMs when medications are dispensed to patients at the pharmacy. Because of the integrated market, PBM parent companies can also profit from directing patients towards the retail and specialty pharmacies that they own. In the question of PBM profits versus patients, we need to make sure that patients are coming out on top every single time. The first step is understanding the problem. The committee's drug pricing investigation shone a light on the way that drug companies have spent years exploiting patients. In the Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats worked to lower drug costs for seniors by allowing Medicare to negotiate prices directly with manufacturers, capping out-of-pocket costs for patients covered by Medicare and limiting the price, for example, of insulin to $35 per vial for seniors. Today, we've got an opportunity to build on that success. This hearing will help us understand the ways that PBMs add value and improve patients' experience, as well as the ways they may not be living up to the hype and contributing to our crisis of drug affordability and accessibility. Given their central role, we need more transparency into how PBMs operate and how their practices might be working alongside others in the supply chain, including Big Pharma, to increase the price of drugs that we all pay. I hope together we can build upon our drug pricing reduction work so far and move towards the moral North Star here, which is that every person in America should be able to access the affordable medication they need in order to survive and thrive with their families. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back without objection. Representative Carter from Georgia, Representative Harshbarger from Tennessee, and Representative Auchincloss from Massachusetts is waived on to the committee for the purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's subcommittee hearing. I'm pleased to welcome an expert panel of witnesses who each bring experience and expertise that will be valuable to today's discussion. I'd first like to welcome Mr. J.C. Scott, who is the President and CEO of Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. Next, we have Lori Riley, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. Next, we have Mr. Craig Burton, who is the Executive Director of Biosimilars Council and Senior Vice President of the Association for Accessible Medicine. Next, we have Mr. Hugh Chancey, who is the President of the National Community Pharmacists Association. Lastly, we have Renee Conti, who is an Associate Professor for Markets, Public Policy, and Law at Boston University. Pursuant to Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses all answered in the affirmative, and thank you. You may be seated. We appreciate all of you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes is expired, and we ask that you please wrap up. I now recognize Mr. Scott to please begin his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to join today's hearing on behalf of PCMA. We represent the nation's pharmacy benefit companies, which negotiate and administer prescription drug benefits for 275 million insured Americans. For most of this year, there has been a heavy congressional focus on our industry with the expressed goal to reduce high drug prices. Yet, as the chart shows, PBMs represent only 6% of the drug dollar, and proposed PBM reform bills do not actually address drug prices or lower costs. I'm grateful for today's opportunity to talk about why, and we will share that chart if it does not appear on the screen. Efforts to lower drug costs must start with an understanding that prices are set by drug companies. When a drug company sets its initial price, that dictates costs throughout the supply chain, from the wholesaler's negotiation for discounts, to its markups to pharmacies, to pharmacy acquisition costs, to the amount that the insurance plan sponsor and patient ultimately pay. PBMs negotiate with drug companies to deliver savings on prescription drugs to patients and health plan sponsors, including employers, unions, and government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. These discounts take the form of rebates, and many are surprised to learn that most prescription drugs don't have a rebate. 90% of prescriptions are filled with generics, and most newly launched brand drugs and specialty drugs don't have a rebate. What's more, study after study has shown that rebates are not correlated with pricing decisions. Government data illustrates this very important point. Prices continue to go up on drugs regardless of how big, small, or non-existent a rebate is. The idea that PBMs force drug companies to set prices higher is simply incorrect. PBMs pass these savings back to plan sponsors and employers who have full decision-making authority on how best to use rebate savings to benefit the patients enrolled in their plans, whether it be through lower premiums, lower out-of-pocket costs, or more comprehensive benefits. Our company's mission is to lower costs. We support lower drug company list prices. We promote use of generics. We want a robust biosimilars market. We cheered when several insulin companies lowered list prices for some of their products earlier this year, and we have called on other drug makers to lower their own list prices for needed medications. PBMs also work with over 60,000 pharmacies on behalf of employers and plan sponsors, and our companies rely heavily on this relationship with retail pharmacies to be access points for the patients they serve. That's why at PCMA, we have been advocating to look toward the future state of retail pharmacy, empowering pharmacists to do more to provide care to patients. No employer, union, or other plan sponsor is under any obligation to hire a pharmacy benefit company. They choose to do so. And you'll hear me talk about the importance of choice as a foundational principle. Employers and plan sponsors have unique needs and represent unique patient populations. They choose whether to contract with the PBM and what they want out of that service. They choose how to set up their contract and how to pay for the services, whether it's through fees, shared savings incentives, or otherwise, and they choose how best to use the savings delivered by their PBM. For the system to work, employers and plan sponsors have to be empowered not only with choice, but with the information they need to make informed choices. At the beginning of the contracting process with the PBM, employers determine what information, disclosures, and audit rights they need. Our industry supports open, transparent exchange of useful information. Our companies comply with the many transparency and disclosure requirements in place at the state and federal levels, but we don't believe the government should dictate private contract terms between two businesses. Employers should make the call on what information they want to receive, and they should receive it. Mandating public disclosure of confidential information will only invite drug companies to collude and raise drug costs. In almost every industry, and especially healthcare, the most effective way to lower costs is through increased competition. That's why we must ensure that any misuse of the patent protections meant to balance rewarding innovation and ensuring affordable access for patients is not blocking competition and keeping prices high. So I'd encourage you to keep two key questions in mind today. Would legislation limit choice, competition, and innovation in the markets? And would it actually help lower drug prices? We asked the committee to take a look at the practices of not just PBMs, but drug companies, pharmacies, wholesalers, plan sponsors, and other stakeholders. High drug prices won't be solved in a vacuum or by singling out one sector, especially not the sector charged with lowering costs. And PCMA is committed to being a positive partner in the policy discussion about how to bring down drug prices and improve patient access. Thank you for including me today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Riley?
Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, my name is Lori Riley, and I'm here representing Pharma. Over the past 23 years, biopharmaceutical companies have brought 750 new medicines to market, including medicines like cell and gene therapies and Alzheimer's treatments. These medicines are helping slow the progression of disease and improving patients' lives, all for 7 cents out of every healthcare dollar, which is what is attributed to brand name medicines. How is that possible? Well, first, insurers do negotiate very significantly with pharmaceutical manufacturers. Typically, rebates exceed 50% or more on average for prescription medicines. Medicines also face significant competition from other brand drugs. Take, for example, hepatitis C medicines. When they were introduced, within a year, there were multiple hepatitis C medicines on the market, which dropped the price by 80%. And last, generic medicines comprise 90% of every prescription written today. These medicines typically launch at 90% less than brand medicines. All of these things combine to make our system based on one of competition and negotiation. Unfortunately, however, there are aspects of the market that today are not working as intended. Today, as was mentioned earlier, just 3 pharmacy benefit managers control 80% of the market. They own or are owned by insurers, they have pharmacies, and they also increasingly have physician practices. And they use their leverage to enrich themselves, often to the detriment of the patients that they're intended to be serving. There are 3 different ways that they do this. Number 1, they limit patients' ability to access lower-priced medicines. They make their money on rebates and fees that are tied to the list price of a medicine. The higher the list price, the more money that goes in their pockets. They often deny or limit access to biosimilar and generic medicines. And when branded medicines offered lower-priced insulins and lower-priced hepatitis C medicines, while they may have cheered, they were reluctant to actually cover them on their formularies. As a result, patients are paying more. Second, they refuse to pass negotiated discounts on to patients. Negotiated rebates often exceed 50% or more, but they insist on making patients pay the full price when they go to the pharmacy counter. In fact, recently the GAO looked at the top 100 most rebated drugs in Part D and found that in 79 of those medicines, patients paid more than their insurance company did for the very same medicine. In fact, 4 times more than their insurance company did. And that's not an anomaly. In 2/3 of all commercial claims and 92% of all Medicare Part D claims, patients are being asked to pay a price tied to the list price of the medicine. This happens nowhere else in the healthcare system. If you go to the hospital or the doctor's office, you pay the negotiated rate, not the high list price. And last, large consolidated PBMs use their leverage to extract additional profits throughout the supply chain, which means higher costs for everyone else. In addition to rebates, PBMs also get additional revenue by new fees and markups on medicines at specialty pharmacies. A Wall Street Journal article just last week found that PBMs are marking up generic drugs by thousands of dollars. They've also created PBM GPOs to generate new sources of profit through opaque fees that provide no direct benefit to patients. A study released just yesterday by Nephron Research found that fees that are paid to PBMs have more than doubled in the last 5 years, and these again are predominantly tied to list prices. That same study found that 42 cents out of every healthcare dollar goes to PBM, not 6 cents, as was just stated by JC. The 6 cents that was quoted by Mr. Scott actually neglects to include the profits that they receive from specialty pharmacies, which is one of the largest drivers of profit that they receive. So how do we fix this problem? Congress has an unprecedented opportunity to hold PBMs accountable, restore competition, and lower costs, and they can do so in 3 ways. Number 1, de-link PBM compensation from the price of medicines so that PBMs are not incentivized to prefer high-list price medicines over lower-price medicines. 2, require that rebates and discounts be passed on to patients so that patients are not left in the position of having to pay more than their insurer for a medicine. And last, increase PBM transparency so that everyone has a better understanding of how PBMs make their money and where those monies go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Burton?
Thank you, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and other members of the committee. My name is Craig Burton. I'm speaking on behalf of the Biosimilars Council and Association for Accessible Medicines. AAM and its Biosimilars Council represent the manufacturers of generic and biosimilar medicines, and we work to expand patient access to safe, quality, and effective generics and biosimilars. Generics are the backbone of U.S. healthcare. As folks have mentioned, they represent 9 of every 10 prescriptions filled in the U.S., but less than 18% of all drug spending. These are lower-cost, FDA-approved versions of brand drugs, and their development costs can range from $5 to $10 million for a relatively simple product to upwards of several $100 million for a complex generic or a biosimilar. And biosimilars in particular are critical to future savings. Today, they cost less than half the price of the brand at the time of biosimilar launch. And importantly, they're also driving brand prices down. One of the most important things about generics and biosimilars, though, is that they expand patient access. Since 2015, biosimilar competition has resulted in more than 344 million additional patient days of therapy. It is no overstatement to say that patients depend on generics and biosimilars. But these savings and this access is at risk because of Medicare policy incentives that delay patient access to and savings from new generics and biosimilars. First, I should note a foundational difference between generic and brand pricing. Brand manufacturers operate in a monopoly environment. They can set high list prices, and they often will negotiate PBM formulary coverage through opaque back-end rebates and fees. But generics do not price with the PBM in mind. Rather, generics are pricing as competition for wholesaler and pharmacy stocking, and they price based on discounts and ability to meet desired volume. In fact, generics rarely, if ever, negotiate rebates with PBMs and health plans. Now, new generics have historically achieved rapid adoption, but that trend is no longer the case. Patients are increasingly blocked from new generics and biosimilars for a period of years. 3 years, in fact, in the Medicare program for new generics to be covered on as many as half of Part D formularies. This delays patient savings, and it's a direct result of Medicare incentives that encourage PBM preferences for high-priced brands with high rebates and fees. Biosimilars also face similar challenges. Humira biosimilars are launching at discounts of up to 85%, but the adoption so far has been less than desired. As biosimilars seek to achieve coverage, some are pricing based on a high list price, high rebate strategy. Others are trying to get coverage with a lower list price and a larger discount. And these PBM preferences can be seen in the biosimilar insulin market, where a biosimilar insulin launched with two prices, one high price with back-end rebates, and one with a 65% discount in list price. But PBMs didn't cover the lower-priced biosimilar insulin. PBMs stuck with the brand. And if you look at adoption in the insulin market, even though 2/3 of prescriptions written for this product were for the biosimilar, only about 1/3 of those prescriptions were actually filled with the biosimilar. This is because of PBM preferences that blocked adoption of the biosimilar. To be clear, as we look at biosimilar and generic competition, it's great that everyone's supportive of it, but it cannot simply be a ploy for PBMs to leverage bigger rebates and fees from brand drugs. This is not sustainable. And even when formularies do cover generics, we're seeing those generics increasingly placed on brand formulary tiers with higher copays. Today, fewer than half of generics in Medicare are on a generic tier. This dramatically increases patient costs, more than doubled the cost, the patient out-of-pocket spending on generics covered in 2011 and 2019, even though the price of those generics declined by 40% over the same time period. Representatives Custer, Miller Meeks, Dunn, and Matsui have introduced legislation to ensure that patients have access to new generics and biosimilars, and that patients do not spend more than necessary for low-cost generics. We encourage Congress to take up this legislation and improve patient access to lower-cost treatments. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Chancey?
Chairman Comer, Ranking Raskin, and other members of the committee. I'm Hugh Chancey. I'm a pharmacist and co-owner of Chancey Drugs. I currently serve as the president of the National Pharmacists Association. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today regarding my experience as a pharmacist and pharmacy owner and how current PBM practices negatively impact my family business and my community. My family has 3 generations of pharmacists. My parents, Hubert and Sue, opened Chancey Drugs in 1966 in Hayhara, Georgia. Chancey Drugs has since expanded under me and my brother's leadership, and more recently, my son Patrick has also taken a leadership role. Chancey Drugs has 7 locations and currently employs approximately 100 people across South Georgia. I am proud of the work that Chancey Drugs has done over the decades, providing health care to patients in my community. But PBMs put this important work at jeopardy, dictating who has access to our pharmacy, the prices patients pay, what reimbursements pharmacy receive, and what medications are on formulary. As you know, the top 3 PBMs control 80% of the market. They use the monopoly power to steer patients to PBM affiliated pharmacies. In fact, a recent report from MedPAC found that vertically integrated PBMs in Medicare Part D appear to pay the affiliated pharmacies more than they do pharmacies like mine. Imagine that. This is leading to a higher cost to the Medicare program. Many of my patients who are forced to get their drugs through mail order receive their medications damaged or don't get them on time. Chancey Drugs has 3 stores near Moody Air Force Base, which means that we have a lot of veterans as customers. When Express Scripts implemented the changes to the Tricare pharmacy network last year, many of our patients were negatively impacted. We had one patient in particular who called in tears. She is blind, and we hand deliver her medications to her home in specialty packaging. With Tricare's changes, she was forced to go to mail order without the specialty packaging, and her elderly husband must drive 40 miles round trip to the pharmacy in Valdosta. Our service members and veterans deserve better. PBMs employ harmful anti-competitive tactics such as spread pricing and DIR fees. Spread pricing is the difference between how much the PBM pays me for a drug and the higher price that they charge the payer for the same prescription. For years, community pharmacists have said PBMs play spread pricing games, contributing to higher drug costs. Studies of state Medicaid managed care programs have found that PBMs overcharge taxpayers while pocketing the spread for themselves. In fact, over the last 2.5 years, Centene has entered into settlements for up to $900 million for at least 17 states for overcharges to the Medicaid program. Another tactic PBMs use are direct and indirect remuneration fees. DR fees have allowed PBMs to pay pharmacies for prescriptions and later claw back thousands of dollars at random. MedPAC March 2023 report found DR fees reached $12.6 in 2021. That's a 33% increase in just 2 years. The unpredictability wreaks havoc on my pharmacy's financial health, threatening my ability to keep the lights on. On top of this, our contracts with PBMs are take it or leave it. Some of the most life-sustaining medications are often underpaid by PBMs. Georgia's cost of dispense for Medicaid patients is $10.63, but it is not unusual for PBMs to pay me a nickel. And oftentimes, we have $0 dispensing fee on Part D prescriptions. Because of PBMs, thousands of pharmacies represented by NCPA have gone out of business over the last decade. And it's not only independent pharmacies that PBMs impact. Large chain pharmacies are also closing. In fact, 2 large grocery stores are closing in my community now. If these large national chains and grocers are having difficulty maintaining pharmacy operations, it's no surprise that small businesses are struggling. Pharmacies are going under while PBMs are getting fatter. CVS, United Healthcare, and Cigna are all part of the Fortune 500 top 20. If the PBM industry continues to go unchecked, there is a severe risk of putting thousands of pharmacies like Chancey Drugs out of business. In sum, community pharmacy supports common sense legislative reform to PBM's harmful practices, which I would be glad to discuss further. I applaud the committee's bipartisan efforts to shine light on the PBMs through this investigation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Conti.
Good morning. I'm Professor Rena Conti. I'm a professor of economics applied to prescription drugs at Questrom School of Business at Boston University. Today, I'm honored to address Representative Comer and Raskin and all distinguished committee members to discuss the pivotal roles played by pharmacy benefit managers in the U.S. healthcare system. PBMs are often regarded as enigmatic intermediaries, despite the central role PBMs play in the healthcare system. The primary function of PBMs is to create a competitive arena for drug makers. This arena is built upon PBM's strategic use of formularies, among other tools, to guide patients towards specific medications. These strategies are intended to foster competition among drug makers. PBMs wield the potential to enhance the efficiency of prescription drug markets, which can ultimately benefit both consumers and payers. Notably, PBMs, through their formulary strategies, incentivize utilization of generic and biosimilar drugs when clinically appropriate. Generic drugs, in turn, offer substantial cost savings for both patients and payers. Use of these strategies do not disturb the incentives for innovation. Nonetheless, I have some concerns about the potential for PBMs in their current organizational structure to burden our system with additional costs. Branded drug makers may respond to the strategies of PBMs in ways that undermine patient benefit. Branded drug makers offer rebates off of list price to compete within the arena constructed by PBMs. PBMs, in pursuit of their own self-interest, may favor placing branded drugs with higher list prices in preferred formulary tiers. When drug makers exclusively retain the power to set list prices and engage in formulary competition, as in our system, it can trigger shadow pricing behavior. In the race for superior placement, list prices may skyrocket without commensurate benefit to patients, as confirmed by the House Oversight Committee's recent reports. Such behavior directly burdens all Americans with higher out-of-pocket costs and undermines access, especially for people who are underinsured, including those with high-deductible health plans and uninsured individuals. It also undermines transparency within the system, essentially disconnecting reimbursement from the acquisition costs of these drugs. The consolidation of PBMs presents challenges. While mega PBMs may extract deeper rebates from branded drug makers, the benefits of such arrangements often remain with the PBMs themselves and are not shared with consumers or payers. The consolidation of PBMs with health plans does not appear to lower premiums for consumers nor enhance their medical benefits. Similarly, the consolidation of PBMs with pharmacies does not appear to render generic drugs even more accessible nor render such services more convenient to access. Moreover, PBM consolidation erodes competition, contributing to increased costs for PBM services and greater opacity in our system. These effects hinder smaller health plans and employers to select services that actually align with their unique health needs. Developing evidence suggests that some PBMs designed formularies primarily to maximize revenues, potentially neglecting the promotion of individual and population health as well as cost reduction. Thus, while PBMs offer efficiencies in our healthcare system, PBMs also pose emergent tests. Increased transparency in the PBM market would empower consumers and employers to make informed decisions in selecting PBMs, plans, and pharmacies that align with their requirements. Banning spread pricing and requiring rebate pass-through may offer solutions to these intricate challenges. However, I urge policymakers to exercise due diligence, as these and related reforms may also yield unintended consequences. I welcome the opportunity to engage in a meaningful discussion with the esteemed members of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed with 5 minutes worth of questioning per member. Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Scott, in the employer-sponsored market, plan sponsors have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees to provide the highest quality plan for the lowest cost. How do large PBMs help employers fulfill their fiduciary duties?
Good morning, Congresswoman. It's nice to see you again. Thank you for your time recently to visit on these questions. So I appreciate your question because it's sort of foundational to what I was getting at in my opening comments, that this is a marketplace where employers and plan sponsors have full choice in how to leverage the value of the PBM. And most of the time, the value that they're looking to derive on behalf of the patients they represent is to bring down the cost of the benefits. And that can be derived through the negotiation with the drug company to bring down the net cost of the drug, to promote networks of lower cost, higher quality pharmacies. All of that generates savings that the employer can then use to expand the benefit, lower the premium, lower out-of-pocket costs, whatever is going to be best for their unique patient population.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, again, Congress has been exploring proposals to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, some of which are included in H.R. 5378, the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act, that we hope the House is going to consider this week. What impact would requiring PBMs to pass through all rebates to patients at the point of sale have on overall drug costs? And what would the impact be on premiums?
Thank you for the question. That is sort of the key consideration here, right? There is a There's an amount of savings that's negotiated, and as long as the price of the drug, the price of the good continues to be high, whether you shift that fully to offset all out-of-pocket cost or you shift that fully to offset premium, then you're just squeezing the balloon and causing costs to rise on the other side of that equation. So if you moved it all to the point of sale, then you're risking that the premium and the cost of the benefit is going to have to go up. We saw that effect measured by CBO and OACT at HHS and others around the Trump administration's rebate rule, all of which is to say this is why it's so important to have flexibility so that there can be a balance struck between keeping the benefit affordable and trying to address out-of-pocket cost at the counter.
Okay. Another question. 25 words or less. What is spread pricing? And why should PBMs be allowed to charge insurers more for a drug than what they paid the pharmacy?
Spread pricing is a form of contracting that the employer can choose for mitigating their financial risk. If I could just use an analogy. So if you're an employer, for example, running a cafeteria, you may say to the vendor, I just want to pay a per-person fee. You tell me how much it's going to be per person, and then the vendor has to deal with the cost of the lettuce and the ketchup and everything that goes into it. Or they may say, I will pay you a small flat fee, and I want exposure to paying for the variability of the things that go into the meal. It's really a financial risk tolerance choice that's being made by the employer.
Okay, so why should PBMs be allowed to charge insurers more for a drug than what they paid the pharmacy?
Well, so in that instance, if you pull the analogy through to the pharmacy marketplace, then the PBM can be compensated if it is able to negotiate a better deal with the pharmacy on the cost of a given drug, but the PBM also owns the risk and takes the loss if they are unable to negotiate a better rate with the pharmacy.
Mr. Clancy, what impact does spread pricing have on independent pharmacies?
The spread pricing is a big problem for us because what we're getting underpaid, and then the spread is going to them.
Okay, well, what would the impact of additional transparency regarding spread pricing be for independent pharmacies?
Well, I think first of all, clear and transparent reimbursement would be helpful to us because many times we're being underpaid. We're actually being paid below our cost of purchasing the product. So I think that that spread pricing is taken away from our reimbursement and making it more difficult for us to serve our patients.
I'm going back to Mr. Scott, and a short period of time. CVS, Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum Rx, or the big three, own 80% of the U.S. PBM market, as the chairman said in his opening remarks. What impact does this consolidation have on prescription drug prices?
Congresswoman, it's important to have a variety of different PBM models, whether a large integrated company or a small standalone PBM, which is why it's been good to see the number of competitors in the PBM market expand by 10% in just the last 2 years. That provides choice for employers and plan sponsors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. In a previous Congress, I was actually the chair of the subcommittee on the federal workforce, where we conducted an extensive investigation into the role of pharmacy benefit managers with respect to the prescription drug pricing under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan. So that is, the FEHBP is the largest employer-sponsored group health insurance program in the world. We've got about 8 million federal employees, retirees, former employees, and their family members. So it's often considered sort of the gold standard when it comes to affordable health insurance. Importantly, our investigation found that the FEHBP employee members, retirees and active employees, were paying up to about 45% more for its prescription drugs. Even with that collective power of 8 million people in a health care plan, they were paying 45% more for prescription drugs than any other agency. And it was because we relied on PBMs to negotiate the prices. When we tried to figure out what the rebate system was that was leading to this unfairness, the PBMs fought us on the issue of transparency. We were trying to find out, okay, how do the PBMs actually work this rebate system? Why is it not transparent? They fought us tooth and nail in court, and won, claiming that it was a proprietary advantage that they had. And so we still cannot get full transparency on that. Ms. Riley, you talked about that in one of your points. How do we get at that? I know some states have individually brought lawsuits. I know Maine has, Texas has, Ohio has. You know, there are states all over the country that are trying to find out the same thing. Like, why, you know, what does a PBM charge, pay for their drug, and why are they charging so much more to employees or to insured parties? You talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And there is a number of pieces of legislation that Congress is considering. One, the PBM Sunshine and Accountability Act, which is a bipartisan bill that members of this committee are sponsors of. I think that would go a long way to providing some sunshine into the various fees that PBMs collect and where that money goes. As you rightly pointed out, there are a number of fees, not just rebates, that PBMs collect. The report that I referenced just released yesterday from Nephron showed that what is happening now, I would argue, is shape-shifting in the PBM market. As Congress and state legislators have begun to shine a light on rebates and the significant dollars associated with rebates, more plan sponsors are demanding that those rebates get passed through to them. So PBMs have set up PBM GPOs, often located offshore, and they collect a number of opaque fees. It's hard to find any direct patient benefit to these fees, and I think it would be enlightening for folks to know just how large and significant these fees are today and how much they've grown in just the last 5 years.
Great. I just want to illustrate one of the absurdities that we found here. So here we have 8 million people in an insurance plan, that collective bargaining power, you know, the weight of that plan. We found that the PBMs were operating individually with CVS and the drug companies, offering another program to the general public. So somebody off the street could come in and pay $10, and there was a whole formulary of drugs that they were available, and for $9.99. Our members that are paying all this money for insurance, 8 million of them paying into this plan, went in and they paid more than someone coming in off the street. So we were telling our members, don't tell them you have insurance, just tell them you're a stranger, you don't have insurance. You'll get a better price from the PBMs than you would with federal employee health insurance. Ridiculous. And it's because of the scam that's being operated, perpetrated by the PBMs. In some cases, the federal employee with insurance was paying $200 more for the same drug that the PBM was offering the general public walking off the street for $9.99. You know, it's just absolutely maddening. And I think we have an area here, Mr. Chairman, where we can actually work together and have some bipartisanship, I dare say, on this. I think the sponsors of this legislation are, from your side and ours, are on the side of the angels, and I heartily support their effort, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leach, and I agree 100% on bipartisan agreement and cooperation moving forward. Chair now recognize Mr. Sessions from Texas for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I would like to, if I could, at the beginning of this, put in the record a report from McKinsey & Company called Improving Patient Adherence Through Data-Driven Insights. I'd like to ask that that's in the record.
Without objection to order.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Our witnesses today have provided, as well as the members, a lot of interesting information. And Mr. Scott, I know that a lot of it is aimed at the business model that you and your companies have established. But it's very apparent to me that that competition is one of those factors that is not part of your equation for the marketplace. And the marketplace would be consumers. And consumers in the United States of America need to be able to count on the United States Congress, the laws of this country. But I think across the board, the marketplace represents an agreement by large companies and small companies to offer a competitive model where it would be available and best for the consumer. We have people who showed up today with a small pharmacy. We have Ms. Riley, who's here with a large pharma companies, and they both see the same anti-competitive model that is employed in this marketplace. Dr. Conti, please tell me what you think would happen if there were full marketplace access. Would prices and a competitive model be better?
So by definition, the market that we have set up is pro-competitive. PBMs clearly are producing savings for Americans and pushing Americans to use generics and biosimilars when they're available. That is a good thing. We all win from that. However, the competitive pressure that is potentially eroding patient access and affordability is related to vertical integration between PBMs and pharmacies or PBMs and plans. It's in those arrangements where we think premiums are not going down and potentially patients are paying more at the pharmacy counter.
Would it be your testimony today, because I heard Ms. Riley allude to this, I believe directly land on it, that it's the PBM's model that they want to control the marketplace, that I would consider this to be anti-competitive? What would you say, Dr. Conti?
I would say, again, these vertically integrated plan and PBM models are complicated and may create perversity, harming us, individual patients. At the end of the day, however, drug makers do set the prices of their drugs, and the list prices are what patients pay out of pocket. So I would say both the drug makers, especially branded drug makers, and the PBMs here are both at fault for imposing costs on us.
Well, we just heard from several members of Congress about an investigation a few years ago where actually it was determined that the PBMs controlled far greater than, I believe, what you're giving reference to, the actual price, giving preference in a marketplace through their market advantage. And that is what I'd like to focus on for a minute. Ms. Riley, I believe that you see this clearer than most of us here on this committee. We're not new to this issue, but I think you've landed on really the equation, and that is that I believe that these PBMs, the largest ones that control 80% of the marketplace, can use their size as an anti-competitive behavior against the marketplace. Could you amplify that?
Absolutely, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly that there is significant evidence from the OIG, from the Federal Trade Commission, from GAO, and a number of others of a number of different practices that PBMs utilize. Number one, to make it harder for companies to reduce the list price of their medicines. So while it is true our companies set the list price of the medicine, PBMs are responsible for setting the terms of coverage and access and cost sharing that patients have, and their preferences do matter. And when companies have attempted to lower their list price, as they did with insulin and hepatitis C medicines, that was not met with cheers, as JC testified, but rather oftentimes exclusions from formularies as a result of doing that. They often also don't prefer biosimilars and lower priced generics. As I referenced in my testimony, the Wall Street Journal, this past week noted that they often overcharge by thousands of dollars generic medicines at their specialty pharmacies. So I believe there's a pattern of behavior that has been well documented by economists and government agencies to demonstrate the large challenges that today exist with PBMs that are working not for the benefit of patients, but to the detriment of patients.
Well, and I would add to that, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm almost over my time, if not over, and that is I believe that the PBMs use their competitive market advantage to hold others out of the marketplace, notwithstanding their own gift that they have provided themselves. So, Mr. Chairman, I intend to be a part of of trying to bring some sanity to this, and that would be through transparency. But I really do appreciate Mr. Scott coming here. I think that the model that could work with PBMs could work, but you cannot use your competitive size against other companies entering, coming to the marketplace as our private pharmacies, even somebody as big as Albertsons, I think that find themselves on the backside of these three largest companies who use, in my opinion, anti-competitive behavior, which should be against the federal law. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Chair. Now recognize Mr. Krishnamurti from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Scott, you said in a PCMA website post from February 14th, 2023, quote, "We can once again state unequivocally the independent pharmacy market is stable," correct? That's what you said in that post, correct?
That sounds correct, yes, sir.
Sir, according to the FTC, as well as Fortune magazine, the number of independent pharmacies has gone down from 23,000 in 2010 to about 19,000 right before the pandemic, and it hasn't done that much better since. Mr. Chancey, I see in your testimony you say PBMs wreak havoc on independent pharmacies' financial health. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And one of the main reasons are what are called DIR fees, direct and indirect remuneration fees, correct?
Yes, sir.
And those often amount to fees that basically claw back any amounts of money that were paid to the pharmacies to dispense drugs in the first place, right? According to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, CMS estimates that fees, DIR fees, have gone up by 91,500% between 2010 and 2019. You don't disagree with that, right? And Ms. Riley, that doesn't contribute to stability in the independent pharmacy market, does it?
It does not.
So let me talk about patients for 1 second. The FTC is conducting a major study of PBMs currently. They have initially released some of their findings in a recent statement from the summer. Here is what they said. They said the following. One patient told us she was required by her health insurance carrier to go through PBM's specialty pharmacy, which significantly delayed medication she vitally needed to ensure she could have her baby. She says, "I may have lost the pregnancy because of the delays." Now, Mr. Chancey, that's consistent with your experience with specialty pharmacies, isn't it? Another finding from the FTC. This is dated again, July 20th, 2023. This is from an owner of an independent pharmacy. Quote, "To keep up with the costs of PBM practices and the ever-increasing cost of prescription drugs while keeping the pharmacy doors open, my mom, a pharmacist, was not able to pay her own wage for 4 months in 2019. Now, Mr. Chancey, is that consistent with your own experience? And that obviously is not a sign of stability among independent pharmacies, is it? Now, the FTC at one time actually sent out letters that stated that at the state and local level, any efforts to increase transparency and disclosure for PBMs was somehow against the best interests of consumers. Now, they sent 11 letters out in the last 20 years. On July 20th, they officially withdrew support for those various letters. Let me just tell you about some of those letters very briefly. They said, quote, "Freedom of choice provisions at the New York State level actually increase pharmaceutical costs for patients." They withdrew support from that letter. Another letter that they wrote on September 7th, 2004, again from the Federal Trade Commission to California state legislature, said that these particular bills that you're pursuing with regard to disclosure requirements hurts patients. The FTC has withdrawn support from that letter. And the list goes on and on and on. I have all 11 letters here This is garbage. The FTC has now officially withdrawn support from all of this guidance. Mr. Chair, I request permission to enter these remnants of these letters into the record.
Without objection, it's ordered.
That is what we have from the FTC. The FTC is conducting a wide-ranging study into what PBMs are doing and wreaking havoc on independent pharmacies and hurting consumers. And I can't wait to see that study. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Mace from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I applaud my colleague across the aisle. We want consumers to have choices, competition, and lower prescription drug prices. I'm going to dive in here. I have several questions, and I would just appreciate just primarily yes or no answers from our witnesses today. We don't have a lot of time this morning. My first question goes to Mr. Scott. You say in your written testimony that PBMs lower prescription costs by encouraging the use of more affordable alternatives to brand drugs such as generics. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you also confirm that PBMs negotiate rebates with drug manufacturers in an effort to reduce the cost of those drugs?
Yes.
In March of 2019, the Journal of American Medical Association expressed concern that your member businesses often exclude low-priced generics from coverage. Are you aware of those claims?
I'm aware of the claims, but not the specific study.
In a purely, interesting, in a purely competitive environment, I'd usually say the market would take care of such anti-competitive practices. Is it true that Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optimum RX make up about 80% of the industry?
I think with the
Yes or no?
No.
Is there yes or no questions? So they're not 80% of the industry. What percentage then would it be?
I believe there's 3 companies that make up 80% of the industry, Congresswoman.
And they are which ones?
Express Scripts and the 2 that you mentioned.
Okay, that was the question. Was the
I'm
answer.
sorry, I missed
Okay,
you.
okay, thank you. Which, if you have 3 companies making up the vast majority, that's not really competitive at all of an industry. All right, Ms. Riley, when does the patent for a branded drug expire?
Patents for medicines are just like patents for any other product. It's 20 years.
Okay. People generally assume that a drug becoming generic will result in a price decrease. Our witness representing the PBMs alleges that they help reduce costs for consumers. In your experience, do PBMs often exclude low-priced generics from the list of covered drugs?
Yes.
Do PBMs often exclude lower-cost generics in favor of high-cost branded drugs, effectively eliminating the benefit of the short patent on drugs?
Yes.
Do you believe they do this to cash in on drug rebates at the expense of patients?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chansey, this past session in my home state of South Carolina, they passed legislation that I worked on a number of years ago, which banned PBMs from preventing pharmacists from discussing more affordable alternatives. Have you or any pharmacists you know experienced these types of restrictions? What was that?
Yes.
Okay. You also expressed concerns that PBMs, which are often vertically integrated with their own pharmacies, are using their pricing power to harm independent pharmacies. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are you aware of a whistleblower lawsuit against CVS Caremark alleging that they sought to block generic competition?
Yes.
Do you believe these practices are commonplace across the PBM market?
Yes.
Do you believe that restrictions on pricing and rebates would result in more generics being prescribed at your pharmacies and a reduction in prescription drug costs?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I would agree. More competition in the market is better for every consumer. Less overreach from government, more competition in the private marketplace is better for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and God bless you. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our nation is facing an inequality crisis not seen since the Gilded Age. At its core is the unprecedented corporate greed that has inflated prices, giving massive bonuses to C-suite executives, and that left the American people struggling. The harm, of course, falls disproportionately on Black, brown, marginalized, and poor folks who are already struggling the most. Our healthcare system is one of the worst offenders with some of the deadliest costs, from big pharma to pharmacy benefit managers to big insurance companies and quote-unquote nonprofit hospital monopolies that abandon communities like mine. Every level of our healthcare system is being exploited to drive money straight into stockholders' pockets. For examples, it appears that PBMs are leveraging their role at the center of the healthcare system to extract profits from players at multiple points. Reporting even suggests that the fees PBMs charge to drug manufacturers increased by 51% over a two-year period. Ms. Rowley, what types of fees do PBMs charge your members, the nation's biggest pharmaceutical companies, and how do those fees get passed on to customers?
They charge a number of fees. I would argue most of those fees are quite opaque, meaning that they're not known necessarily to many folks, including the plan sponsors. They're data fees and all sorts of fees that oftentimes pop up out of nowhere and, as you mentioned, have increased significantly. And I would argue they provide no direct benefit to the patients.
Thank you. In your members' experience, are the fees charged by PBMs tied in any way to the list price of a drug, and how does this affect the price the consumer pays?
Yes, I would say in virtually every instance, these fees are tied to the list price of the drug, which, as you suggest, the higher the list price, the larger the fee, the larger the rebate, the more money that goes into the pocket of the PBM.
Thank you. Your organization, which represents big pharma giants from Bayer to Pfizer and until recently represented opioid push in Purdue Pharma, is running an aggressive ad campaign blaming PBM rebate practices for high drug prices. What motivated that campaign, and how much did you all spend on that campaign?
Well, what motivated the campaign is to shed light on the practices that have been pervasive over the past many years, which is PBMs overcharging patients at the pharmacy counter, not passing, the significant rebates over $200 billion a year back to the patients to lower the drug prices they have.
How much did you spend on it?
Our goal, I'd have to get back to you. I don't know the total amount spent on that ad campaign. But
okay, thank you. The United States pays by far the highest prices for prescription drugs in the world. Pharma member Novo Nordisk is charging Americans with diabetes $12,000 for Ozempic, while the exact same drug can be purchased for $2,000 in Canada. Pharma member Eli Lilly is charging Americans nearly $200,000 for Cyramza to treat stomach cancer, a drug that can be purchased in Germany for $54,000. Pharma member Sanofi is charging America over $200,000 for Kyprolis to treat thyroid cancer, a drug that can be purchased in France for $30,000. Pharma member Gilead is charging Americans with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma $424,000 for Yescarta, a therapy that can be purchased in Japan for $212,000. Ms. Riley, do you really expect this committee to believe that the blame lies entirely with PBMs and not also with your members?
I would say all of the prices that you quoted are list prices.
Was
medicine.
rhetorical, but I do have another question. Why are several of your member companies suing to stop the federal government from negotiating drug prices through the Inflation Reduction Act?
I'd be happy to answer that question. We have strong concerns about the constitutionality of the IRA provisions that were passed. Number one, they violate the separation of powers because Congress delegated too much authority to an outside entity.
But your concerns about negotiating drug prices, does your company have that?
What IRA
about allowing the
was
federal
not,
government to negotiate drug
was not
prices?
Negotiation, and let me be clear, it is a misnomer to call it negotiation. These are the choices our companies face. The government sets the price of a medicine. It's a take it or leave it price. If we choose not to pay the price that the government offers us, we face two options. One, up to a 1,900% tax on the sale of every single medicine sold, or we can.
Well, it seems like the
withdraw
American
from the
people are
entire
receiving that tax right now on prices that are incredibly over expensive. So thank you so much for your cost. Mr. Scott, I'd also like to hear your take on this. Your claim that PBMs use the fees they charge drug manufacturers and pharmacies to create cost savings in the system. Can you give me some concrete examples? Because it sounds to me like they're using these fees to churn an additional profit.
Yeah, I think we could look specifically at the Medicare Part D program, where it has been documented that virtually 100% of the rebates that are negotiated are passed back to the Part D plan sponsors, and we have seen that deliver a steady low premium for Part D beneficiaries over a number of years.
Thank you. I have to get my time back. But I want to end by saying these profits from big corporations grow, the American people suffer. It's despicable that more than 500,000 households go bankrupt each year because of medically related debts. Healthcare is a human right. It's about time we started treating it that way. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. LaTurner from Kansas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all of you joining us here today. Mr. Chancey, we have seen examples in the past of PBMs engaging in spread pricing, where the PBM charges payers more than what they reimburse the pharmacy and then pocket the difference. In my home state of Kansas, accusations of this practice were recently settled for $26.7 million. How difficult is it for pharmacies to tell that they are being reimbursed less than what the payer is paying to the PBM?
We're not always aware of how much they're charging the payer, but I'll give you an example. I work with a self-insured company in my area, and we had a specialty drug that we filled for that company, and the next fill they mandated it go to the PBM. The PBM's the one that approved the rate for me. They ended up charging the company $300 more when it went to their mail order. So we see instances like that happen, so we know it's there.
Is it happening, but you would assume that it's happening and you don't know it
Right.
a lot of the time?
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, I assume that happens quite a bit. Mr. Scott, do you believe that additional transparency in the price setting of prescription drugs is important?
Yes, transparency can be beneficial.
Just last week in the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Scott, they ran an article on the price of imatinib. How did I do with that? Close? Yeah? The generic form of the cancer drug Gleevec. According to the report, this drug went generic in 2016 and can be bought today for as little as $55 a month. But if you happen to have CVS or Cigna, the same drug can cost as much as $6,600 a month. The article makes the claim that this in large part is due to the role of PBMs and PBM-owned pharmacies. How would you respond to the claims laid out in this article, Mr. Scott?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I saw the article as well, and I would start by level setting that the PBM's goal is always to manage to the lowest net cost for the drugs that they are offering to patients in any particular plan. I know there was some survey data as a part of that Wall Street Journal article that conflated what's listed in the Medicare Plan Finder, which is the maximum possible highest contracted rate, which does not just really show what the average patient pays out of pocket. Our goal is lowest net cost. I think those trends.
I understand your goal, and just if you'll the contents of what I just said, that when the generic can be bought today for as little as $55 a month, but if you have CVS or Cigna, it can cost as much as $6,600 a month. How can you explain that to the American people?
Without having the specifics on a particular drug, if you look at Gleevec,
let's stipulate that it's true. How is that fair? Would you agree that
there may be multiple versions of the same generic drug at different price points and also different issues about supply availability, which have to be taken into account?
So you would say there is a scenario by which that it would make sense and be fair and reasonable that it could cost $55 a month for a generic, but if you have CVS or Cigna, it's $6,600 a month. There's a scenario in your mind where that makes sense and that's fair.
There are scenarios where other factors beyond cost come into consideration, and in those
Granted,
outliers,
but that big of a delta?
Well, in those outliers, I think the plan sponsor has to be very thoughtful about benefit design and out-of-pocket exposure for patients on that drug.
You said in your testimony that choice and flexibility in the market are a foundational principle for effective prescription drug coverage and delivery. Does the fact that the three largest PBMs currently make up 80% of the market not run counter to that foundational principle of choice and flexibility?
No, actually, the trends that we're seeing are more and more entrants and competition in the PBM marketplace. And that choice and flexibility is benefited by having large companies can provide certain services as well as smaller individualized companies that provide more tailored services. That's the definition of having different models to choose from for any given employer.
80%? 3 PBMs?
Oftentimes, you'll see some larger PBMs be able to use that scale, which is really important in negotiating with large drug companies to be able to have broader populations of patients and beneficiaries that they represent in order to help bring down the net cost of the drug. So scale can matter as a value proposition for many employers when they're choosing their PBM.
Lori Riley, are new generic drugs suffering as a result of PBM coverage decisions to prefer higher priced drugs with high rebates over lower list price drugs? Can you give an example of this?
Yeah, I think there is evidence of that. We saw it with not just new generics, but lower priced brand medicines that have entered the insulin example, the hepatitis C example, where our manufacturers have issued lower priced products in the hopes that those would get picked up by the PBMs because they would be lower cost to the consumer, because everyone says they want pharma to lower their list prices. When we actually do lower their list prices, they don't get covered by the PBM.
Really quick, just answer the question quickly. Has market consolidation enabled and incentivized them to negotiate higher rebates?
Yes, I think actually negotiation works in the system. The challenge is how does those rebates get passed on to the patient that needs them? And I think that's what's broken in the system.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Conti, as Americans, we have the highest global, we are the global exception when it comes to drug prices because we face exorbitant prices for life-saving prescription drugs. During the committee's first hearing on pharmacy benefit managers in May, Dr. Miriam Atkins, an oncologist, described a situation in which one of her patients was sent a $1,000 bill for a drug as part of cancer treatment. Dr. Atkins explained that patients unable to afford this cost, and here I'm quoting him, just won't take the medication, and then that will affect their life expectancy, end quote. Professor Conti, how do high drug prices harm patients that seek life-saving care from their providers?
Thank you so much for the question. Financial toxicity is real. It's real among Americans who are facing a dread diagnosis and treatment of cancer and other conditions. Our evidence suggests that more than 40% of people with some types of blood cancer are facing financial toxicity that makes them choose between filling their medications and paying their rent. This is a real concern and one that is affecting patients' health and their ability to take care of themselves and their families.
Thank you, Professor Conti. I have another question for you. According to one outside group, and here are some astounding statistics. 1/2 of U.S. adults say they have difficulties affording health care. It's half the people who live in this country. And 1 in 3 adults ages 60 to 64, and 1 in 5 adults age 65 and older paid more, and here's another astounding number, more than $2,000 annually in out-of-pocket costs for their health care. I don't know how they do it. High prescription costs can have a devastating effect on patients and families. Last Congress, President Biden signed into law the Democratic-led Inflation Reduction Act. Under this law, out-of-pocket costs for patients covered by Medicare Part D will be capped at $2,000 per year starting in 2025. This will improve the lives of 1.4 million Americans covered by Medicare. It will lead to substantial savings for patients who need expensive medications. Professor Conti, in addition to saving patients money, how will the Inflation Reduction Act's drug pricing reforms improve long-term health outcomes for Americans seeking care?
Thank you so much. The IRA provisions are a substantial evolution in access to prescription drugs for Americans. Right now, seniors have greater access to insulin based on IRA provisions. Seniors also have better access to vaccines that prevent serious illness. And finally, Part D redesign will extend access to patients for 49 million Americans starting in the next year. This is a major, major step forward for population health and individual health as well.
Thank you, Dr. Conti. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about the 80% number, and while it sounds extremely disturbing, I just looked up in the short time that I've had various marketplaces. Are you aware, Mr. Scott, that Lowe's, Home Depot, and Menards compose 87% of the home improvement market?
That sounds right.
That is terrifying. Terrifying. Can you imagine the impact on consumers? Oh my goodness. Can you imagine how much that they are putting the squeeze on Black & Decker and DeWalt, right? Because if DeWalt and Black & Decker want to sell their products, they've got to deal with Lowe's and Home Depot, right? Maybe what we should be doing in Congress is studying the spread or the pricing that Lowe's or Home Depot have on some of the products that they're selling, like Black & Decker and DeWalt, because we want to make sure that the consumers are taken care of, right? That's what this place is all about, government stepping in to take care of the consumers. Wouldn't it be interesting if Black & Decker and DeWalt decided to enter into a campaign? That's really what they need to do. Mrs. Riley, let me ask you this. How much has your industry spent in television advertisements demonizing PBMs?
I don't know the exact amount. Happy to report back.
Well, I have an article that I'll submit to the record that Pharma spent over $9 million on anti-PBM advertising. Mr. Chairman, if I could submit that to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, I'm actually interested in what we can actually do to reduce costs. In my opinion, and I might be the only one on this committee who has actually been in the position of negotiating with PBMs, of deciding what PBM that we were going to use and purchase or enter a contract with over 100,000 lives. And I can tell you, if you're in that situation, you know there is choice. There's a lot of PBMs to choose from, and not a single one is coming to the table saying, we're going to increase your costs for your patients. Every one of them is bringing down those costs. So as the employer, I'm telling you that eliminating the opportunity to use a PBM will only increase the premiums for those insured. So the question that I have within the 2 minutes, Mr. Scott, what can we actually do that would reduce the costs of pharmaceuticals?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. And I would say a couple of things. I think you're exactly identifying one of the primary value propositions that employers measure a PBM on, which is, are they going to be able to bring down my net cost and help me to provide affordable benefits? And the PBMs, as has been recognized, I think have a very strong track record of delivering about $145 billion in value for the system every year through that work of negotiating discounts. Where we sometimes get caught up is when we see that the balance, as I referenced, in the use of the patent system is being leveraged in inappropriate ways to keep new competitor drugs off the market. Where there's no competition, it's a lot harder to leverage that to negotiate savings on behalf of plan sponsors. So looking at some of those patent practices, we think would be an important step to really making that a competitive marketplace.
What about the dynamics with the biosimilar drugs? Is there a lot of opportunity with that?
Absolutely. And I think we have seen that in the few instances where biosimilars have already come into the marketplace. Humira is a great example of where the competition is only coming online this year, and we can analyze what happened in the competitive marketplace so that it wasn't on the market sooner. But as those have come into the market, they're having a positive effect on bringing down the cost of the originator product and providing more affordable options for patients and plans.
The way I see it, Mr. Scott and others, is that this is similar to what Netflix has done to the entertainment industry. Netflix was a great disruptor. It negotiated with the entertainment industry in mass because of their large subscriber pool. What's ridiculous to me is that if Blockbuster came here, they would probably be screaming in front of Congress that they're having to close to the huge membership pool of Netflix, and that Netflix drives everyone to their product. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Brown from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this country, far too many people are forced to choose between paying for their medications and keeping the lights on. This impossible choice is a crisis largely manufactured by Big Pharma and pharmacy benefit managers. In 2021, Oversight Committee Democrats published the results of a 3-year-long investigation into pharmaceutical companies' drug pricing and found pharma giants target the United States market, exploiting taxpayers with higher prescription drug prices than anywhere else in the world. Our investigation found in the past, Big Pharma has taken advantage of Medicare's inability to negotiate and hiked prices on patients to the tune of $25 billion over a 5-year period. And that was just for the 7 drugs we investigated. As a result of Democrats passing the historic Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law by President Biden, Medicare is now finally able to negotiate directly with drug manufacturers to bring down the price of life-saving prescription drugs. President Biden is putting dollars back into the pockets of American families and Big Pharma on notice for decades of unchecked price gouging. So, Dr. Conti, I want to ask you, how will Medicare's negotiation of drug prices lead to lower out-of-pocket costs for seniors?
Thank you so much for the question. IRA passage is a major evolution in access to prescription drugs for Americans, and especially for seniors. We expect that insulin-dependent diabetics will receive immediate savings at the pharmacy counter and improve access. So will adults seeking vaccines and their children seeking vaccinations to prevent serious illness. And seniors who are covered under Medicare Part D will directly benefit from Part D redesign, improving access and improving both their individual health, but also population health.
Thank you. And Dr. Conti, how will Medicare's ability to negotiate to lead to better health outcomes for millions of seniors and patients with disabilities?
Sure. We expect that approximately $3.4 billion in out-of-pocket costs were imposed upon American seniors with the 10 drugs that are slated for negotiation first this year. Lowering those costs, even 20% at the pharmacy counter, will expand access and hopefully lead to better individual outcomes and population health.
Thank you. And you kind of led into my next question. Can you expound on the significance of these 10 drugs?
Sure. Approximately 10 million Americans are taking those drugs currently, and we expect that, again, their cost savings at the pharmacy counter will amount to approximately 20%, maybe more. That will be significant savings for them and, again, lead to greater access in using these drugs.
Thank you, Dr. Conti. So President Biden's announcement regarding these 10 drugs is just a start. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, Medicare will be able to negotiate the price of even more life-saving drugs in subsequent years. An additional 15 drugs starting in 2027, another 15 in 2028, and another 20 each year afterwards. We must build on these successes by increasing access to affordable and equitable health care and requiring comprehensive transparency rules in drug pricing. If my Republican colleagues truly want to reduce staggering drug costs, they should join with the Democrats to build on the achievements of the Inflation Reduction Act. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Higgins from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists being here today. It's a really painful discussion for my constituents and my family back home. I feel that our nation in many ways has betrayed our biblical responsibility to care for our elders. It's a real problem. The Word tells us that, cast me not off in the time of old age, forsake me not when my strength faileth. I'm not sure how these PBMs sleep at night. It's an issue. Our elders are like treasures. They're commonly frightened. They have no financial stability. They're commonly alone. And they're constantly receiving confusing letters in the mail from insurance companies and doctors' bills and benefit plan offers and wild promises from this company and that agency and the other offer. Almost their last most reliable friend that they have in their life. If anybody think this is funny, you find it funny, talk to me in the hallway. We'll see how that conversation goes. We're talking about our elders in our country. They deserve to be respected and cared for. And one of the last remaining remnants of what America was when we cared for our elders was our pharmacists. And our pharmacists are being driven out of business by PBMs and the cost of medicine. You see another giggle. You'll meet a side of me you don't like. Mr. Chancey, you've been in the pharmacy business for generations, sir. That's what your statement clarifies. I recall growing up, I'm the seventh of 8 children. I was born in 1961. My father, we raised and trained horses. We didn't have money, we didn't have health insurance, but you know what we had? We had a doctor, we had a pharmacist. And we'd get injured. Injury was common in a life like that. We'd get to the doctor, my dad would pay him cash. There was no middleman, there was no government bureaucracy, there was no insurance restrictions and mandates. There was my family, there was the doctor, there was the pharmacist. And it was a formula that worked. Mr. Chancey, you come from that background, it sounds like, sir. Yeah, I'm quite sure you recall those days with your grandparents and your parents. Tell us, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Tell us from your heart, from your story, of how this deep pain is being brought into your community, especially into the homes of your elders, by the monopolistic power of these PBMs and the cost of health care and medicines for our elders. I give you my remaining minute, Mr. Chancey.
Thank you, sir. I grew up in a small town, and my father was that pharmacist, and he cared for the people in that community. We had relationships with them, and they depended on us. And it was back in the day before we had PBMs. It was all cash, and we charged to those patients that couldn't pay for it at the time. And there's 4 counties in the state of Georgia that the only accessible health care practitioner is a pharmacist. There's no doctors, there's no hospitals or anything. And if we don't do things to change, if we don't have PBM reform, then we're going to have pharmacy deserts, not just in rural America, but in the cities. So it is critical that we make some reform that's going to allow us to stay in business and take care of the seniors like you're talking about. It is critical for us to be able to do that. Under the system we have now, we're restrained. And you talk about wreaking havoc on our business. In 2018, we paid $865,000 in DR fees. In 2022, it almost doubled. And this year alone, I'm at $1.2 million just through July. Now, that's taken away from jobs, and that's taken away from opportunity in small communities that I live in. So I think there needs to be a lot of reform. We need to have clear, transparent pricing, and we also need to stop the ability for the PBMs to be steering patients to other pharmacies where they don't have a relationship and people aren't there to care for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chancey.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Bush from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today in defense of patients, pharmacies, and healthcare providers. Before I came to Congress, I worked as a nurse in a hospital and a community mental health agency. I had to worry every single day about whether my patients could afford the medication that I knew they needed. It's an awful part of an otherwise extremely rewarding profession. We know that PBMs play a critical role in the pharmaceutical supply chain, but that doesn't mean that drug manufacturers are being let off the hook. Big Pharma plays a leading role in drastically and unethically raising the cost of life-saving medications for the sake of profit and for the sake of greed. Notably, only 3 companies, Optum Rx, CVS Caremark, and Express Scripts, make up a staggering 80% of the PBM market, which we have heard earlier. 3 companies play a central role in making decisions about what medications are covered by healthcare insurance plans and the costs of those medications. PBMs negotiate pricing with drug manufacturers and use these negotiations to determine which medications are covered on someone's insurance formulary. The difference between life or death is a series of shady contracts struck between the drug manufacturer, the PBM, the insurer, and the pharmacy. The end result of this complicated design is patients are expected to shell out thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket medical costs, even for life-saving prescription medicine. Professor Conti, how does PBM control over drug formularies affect the medications patients are able to receive at the pharmacy?
PBMs steer patients to use, in general, the cheapest and most effective drug for them. That includes over a 90% utilization of generics and biosimilars when they're available. This benefits patients and it benefits their health.
My understanding is that PBMs consider formularies, though, as sensitive business information. PBM decisions about which medications to cover and how to sort them into tiers or rankings are generally not available to patients. And as the nurse, I was never able to get that information early. I had to wait until they sent us the book, and this was very devastating and horrifying for so many of our patients. Professor Conti, if a patient doesn't understand why a specific medication is chosen for inclusion on a PBM formulary, how will they know that the price that they are being asked to pay at the pharmacy is a fair price?
They will not.
Thank you. It's clear both the PBM and the pharmaceutical industries are in desperate need of reforms that increase transparency and reduce costs for patients and for pharmacies. In fact, Barnes-Jewish Hospital, the largest hospital in Missouri and the largest private employer in my district, has the following to say about their experience with PBMs, and I quote, "Often pharmacy benefit managers create additional financial and administrative challenges for many providers, pharmacies in particular, and delay or deny patients access to the medications they need," end quote. The biggest hospital system in the state of Missouri is at the mercy of PBMs. They often require step therapy treatments or burdensome prior authorizations before covering medications ordered by a healthcare provider, which is devastating to patients and their care. They lose jobs, they lose homes, they can lose children because they are now unstable on medications. And I'm speaking to that being a mental health nurse that watched it happen to my patients over and over again. They were stable, and then the new formulary came out. Insurance companies, PBMs, and Big Pharma are deciding what medications patients should take, not patients with their doctors, with their doctors. These obstacles compromise patient care at every single turn by denying patients the life-saving medications and the treatments that they need. As a nurse, I've seen it over and over with the patients I've cared for, as I said, who are stable on medication, some for decades. Their care was upended when their PBMs and insurance companies decided that their medication was not profitable. The health and well-being of the people of this country lie in the hands of industries represented right here today. How can we be confident that these companies are acting in the patient's best interest if they face so little competition? People with terminal illnesses, disabilities, seniors, and our most vulnerable members of our community deserve more. I implore my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to enact sensible legislation to drastically reform the PBM industry and get drug prices under control once and for all. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Burton, I've got some questions for you. How do the rebates affect the biosimilar market? Can you, and be as concise as you can, because I've got a few others.
Absolutely. simplest way to look at it, biosimilars right now have a choice. They can price, keep a high price and offer a rebate, or they can drop their list price, which benefits patients. But dropping their list price is not getting them onto formulary. So they have a choice of engage in the rebate games, which has a chance of getting them on coverage, or have a lower list price, which benefits patients, but isn't being covered by PBMs.
So what you're saying is this has a negative impact on patients.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. In the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act permitted the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate the prices of some prescription drugs covered under Medicare Part D. As the Senior Vice President of the Association for Accessible Medicines, Mr. Burton, how will the Inflation Reduction Act's government price setting scheme affect patient access to lower cost generic and biosimilar medicines, in your opinion?
Yeah, we are concerned that the negotiation provisions of IRA could undermine generic and biosimilar competition. They could reduce incentives for generic and biosimilar entry. Depending on how the price is set by CMS, that could actually end up rewarding the brand and giving the brand more of a monopoly for a longer period of time if it reduces incentive for generic entry.
But it also reduces the number of different types of drugs that some patients might need. Would that be an accurate statement?
So I believe the way IRA works, as they choose products, generics and biosimilars are looking for certainty. In order to invest, I mentioned biosimilars can cost several $100 million to develop. Mm-hmm. Without knowing what products will be negotiated and what the negotiated price will be, it becomes challenging for a biosimilar manufacturer to make that investment commitment years before that price is ever negotiated. And we believe that biosimilars and generics at the end of the day